Suddenly, the ruling Montagnards and Conventionals found themselves in need of a soldier who would serve them faithfully and implicitly, a man of sufficient strength to carry out their purpose, yet of too low a rank to become their rival. In Thermidor of 1794 speech making and the passing of decrees, the mere threat of the law, and of such a general as Barras, with a few constabulary, had been enough to overthrow Robespierre and his friends in their retreat at the town hall, or General Henriot when he galloped half drunk through the streets without finding a single beggar to follow him. But even then, without the constabulary, the event might have proved different. Now it was a more serious matter. Members of the convention, who still remained after sitting for 3 years and cutting each other's throats, had presented the country with a workable constitution, though any constitution depends for success not so much on its intrinsic merit as on the method of its application. But the members intended also to force certain additional decrees which they had already passed upon the nation. According to these, they were still to control the legislative power for at least 1 year and the executive for 3. Paris wished for the constitution, but not the conventionals. Almost the whole country was prepared to stand by the capital, which had declared against the extremists for the first time since August 1791. The neighboring departments supported the resolutions passed by their electoral assemblies. A violent reaction set in against the terrorists, a reaction which, though signalized in place by murder and outrages, found a more legitimate vent in urging on the electorate to demand their right of free representation. All Paris was in arms. Forces were pouring in from every section, and there was no one who opposed them. Terrorist troops, which had been formerly disbanded, were hastily rearmed. Retired officers who had applied, like Bonaparte, to be put upon the active list again were reinstated and badly equipped. There was a certain number of soldiers, but it was doubtful whether they would fire or whether their officers who were parleying with the rebels were not preparing to change sides by throwing up their commissions and going over to the enemy. Firearms and ammunition were distributed to the supporters of the convention who, surrounded in the Tuileries, were prepared to receive the attack of the sovereign people, very differently from the sway which Louis XVI had done. But this time, the people were not the men of Marseille and Brest, but the Parisian mob. Besides, were the people really sovereign as soon as they ceased supporting the extreme party? Still, there was no suitable commander for Barras, the dictator, although a good enough man on such occasions as that of Thermidor, or for military reviews, would not trust himself in any struggle likely to prove serious. He did not indeed lack courage, for he had formerly shown considerable proofs of it, but he had acquired nothing in his campaigns in India, and even in Toulon, except the dandyism of an aide-de-camp, a delight in cocked hats, and the resolute determination to get himself made general. About his real military talents, he had not the slightest delusion. On the 12th of Germinal in the year 3, when there was reason to be apprehensive of the Jacobins, he had presided in the convention. The government joined Pichegru with him in office, but of his own accord he appointed Pichegru commander-in-chief, although he was afterwards himself appointed commander of the forces for protecting the distribution of supplies. Yet this was a civil rather than a military dictatorship, connected more with corn stuffs than strategy. The present situation was far more serious, and the responsibility of it considerably graver, requiring a soldier possessed of energy, resolution, and tactical skill. Barras drew back, so too did all the generals whose rank and former services had designated them as suitable for the command. Several members then thought of little Bonaparte. The Corsican suggested him first, then someone who had seen him with the army in Italy and whose wife had patronized a young officer. Lastly, he was recommended by Barras himself, who had known and helped him to promotion before Toulon. Would he accept the post which others had refused? Would he dare to be the first since 1791 to oppose the sovereign people? Would he make use of the force necessary for the purpose? There was no reason reason why he should not, for he stood in no superstitious awe of the revolutionary mob of Paris, nor did he believe it to be invincible. The opportunity had come of distinguishing himself above the common crowd, and of forcing himself to be looked upon as an indispensable personage. Besides this, the further opportunity offered of crushing the spell under which the Parisians had oppressed all France during the last 6 years, and of avenging the soldier upon the civilian. 4 years before, he had seen from the carousel the dirty mob attack the palace. That same evening, he had written to Joseph, if the king had only shown himself on horseback, he would have gained the day. If Louis XVI, through a flash of masterly intuition, or by one of those lucky chances that come to fortunate men, had called to his assistance the little artillery lieutenant who was looking on at the preparations for battle from the window of Fauvelet-Bourien's pawn shop, that officer would have responded willingly and have saved the throne. Even as he was now about to see the convention, it would even have been the easiest task of the two. The king, he wrote, had fully as many troops at his disposal as the convention had on the 13th of Vendemiaire, and the enemies of the convention were far more formidable and better disciplined. The question was of determination rather than power, and Napoleon had plenty of determination. The object he aimed at was to win the engagement, and he pressed towards this end without any hesitation or scruples concerning the means which he employed. In a single hour, the face of things was changed, orders were given rapidly, and the defense became no longer civil, but military. The rising was crushed, not so much because the attacking National Guards were swept through with grape shot close to Saint-Roch or in the Rue Nicaise or at the Pont Royal, but because the guns under the orders of the young commander had been most skillfully placed, and the gunners at his command had not hesitated to apply their matches to the touch holes. After that, Napoleon rose rapidly. If he had won the success on the 10th of August and not on the 13th Vendemiaire, he would have found himself the servant of the throne instead of, as he now was, the servant of the convention. It was the men of the convention who had chosen him out for promotion and advancement, and who were bound henceforward to furnish him with the opportunities of employing his military talent on the field of action and showing what a soldier he was. He had, besides, no other connections at Paris and no opportunity of engaging or allying himself with another party. The members of the convention were his only friends. Barras had drawn him from obscurity, made him second in command to himself, then commander-in-chief of the Army of the Interior, promoted him next to be general of a division, married him to his own mistress, Josephine de Beauharnais, and lastly appointed him to command the army in Italy. He found his wife Josephine a member of the same circle. Barras and Talleyrand were the witnesses to his marriage. There were also a few turncoat royalists who had rallied to the Republic, and a good many ladies whose chief aims were to lead a life of pleasure and procure themselves wealthy lovers, mere courtesans whom the dazzled young Corsican took for women of the world. All this society was engaged in paying court to the coming man whose patronage and favor they sought, but whom they freely slandered behind his back during the Italian campaigns in which he established his reputation and acquired a worldwide renown, and in which he played the part of conqueror and deliverer. He was in reality only an officer under the command of those who held the executive power in France. It is true they would have hesitated to deprive him of his command, but if they had done so, he would have been obliged to obey. On the other hand, he knew that they had need of him, and when any difficulty was put in his way, he threatened to throw up his commission, but this was the only power he had over them. Whatever services he did the directors, whatever help he gave them, he was still dependent on them for moral and material support. His fortune was linked with theirs, and their enemies were his. In Vendemiaire, in the year 4, he had had triumphed in the name of the convention and to its advantage. Nearly 2 years later, when the former members of that body again found themselves in difficulties, they once more summoned him to their rescue. The convention had been unable to impose its control indefinitely upon the country. The executive power was assured to it for 3 years. The legislative for one. More than that, the members did not dare to demand. According to the Constitution, the members of the two councils were to be placed a third at a time. The convention had supplied the 2/3 who resigned in the years 5 and 6, 1/3 already reactionary but pretending to call themselves Republican, had been elected in the year 4. A second third, elected in the year 5, was more pronouncedly so. What would third be like? A majority was not certain even in the directory, for it depended upon a single vote for want of Osh, who was worn out, but who nevertheless sent soldiers to assist them. The former members of the convention appealed to Bonaparte. Napoleon not only supported them in the ardent proclamations issued from his victorious army, but sending Augereau to carry out their wishes, he purged the directory and the councils in such a way that there were left in them only the supporters of the right party.